By 1822, when Joseph Smith was 16, his family's farm was making progress, and the Smiths were likely beginning to feel a little more financial security. Still, they lived in a very cramped log cabin with 11 people between the ages of 1 and 24. Lucy related a story that seemed to have left a mark on her for many years. After being invited to tea with some wealthier women in the community and getting along with them very well, one of them remarked on Lucy's situation by saying,
"Mrs. Smith ought not to live in that log house of hers any longer. She deserves a better fate, and I say she must have a new house. She ought to have the best of everything."
While no offense was intended, Lucy was likely embarrassed by her situation. But she did her best not to appear as a charity case and responded,
"It's true I have suffered many disagreeable disappointments in life with regard to property, but I now find myself very comfortably situated to what any of you are."
Lucy may have played off these remarks publicly, but considering her growing up in a middle-class family, it's likely that she felt embarrassed. It also seems that her husband and sons could sense their mother's feelings and desired to help. So in 1822, they began construction on a more traditional frame house on the family farm. However, the relatively normal events like these in the lives of the Smiths were about to take a dramatic turn. On September 21st, 1823, Joseph was 17, and as is common for 17-year-olds, Joseph began thinking more seriously about his future and the big picture of his life. And considering Joseph's visionary experience 3 years earlier, he began to reflect on his own standing before God. And what happened that night changed Joseph and his family's life forever.
After I had retired to my bed for the night, I betook myself to prayer and supplication to Almighty God for forgiveness of all my sins and follies. While I was thus in the act of calling upon God, I discovered a light appearing in my room, which continued to increase until the room was lighter than at noonday, when immediately a personage appeared at my bedside, standing in the air. He had a loose robe of most exquisite whiteness. It was a whiteness beyond anything earthly I had ever seen. Not only was his robe exceedingly white, but his whole person was glorious beyond description. When I first looked upon him, I was afraid, but the fear soon left me. He called me by name and said to me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God, and that God had a work for me to do, and that my name should be had for good and evil among all nations.
So what was this work Joseph would be given to do? The messenger told the 17-year-old Joseph that he was to bring forth an ancient record that had been hidden long ago in a hill not far from where he lived. Joseph didn't mention anything to his family, and was likely a little stunned by the entire experience, but he did remember being exhausted.
As usual, I went to the necessary labors of the day, but in attempting to work as at other times, I found my strength so exhausted as to render me entirely unable. My father, who was laboring along with me, discovering something to be wrong with me, told me to go home.
But on his way home, Joseph ended up laying on the ground in exhaustion, and as he slipped out of consciousness, he saw the angel in vision, who, among other things, told him he should tell his father. So upon awaking, he went back, pulled his father aside, and told him everything. Joseph's father had likely known about Joseph's previous experience, and he himself, having had spiritual experiences, took Joseph seriously and told Joseph that he should do exactly what the angel said he should do. So Joseph went immediately to the place on the hill where the angel had showed him during his vision. In later years, Joseph described what happened in vivid detail.
Near the village of Manchester, Ontario County, New York, stands a hill of considerable size. On the west side of the hill, not far from the top, was a stone of considerable size. This stone was thick and rounding in the middle on the upper side and thinner towards the edges, so that the middle part of it was visible above ground, but the edge all around was covered with earth. Having removed the earth, I obtained a lever, which I got fixed under the edge of the stone, and with a little exertion raised it up. I looked in, and there indeed did I behold the plates.
In addition to the plates, Joseph described seeing a breastplate and two semi-transparent stones fastened together, which he later would learn were to aid in the translation. With Joseph's family being in poverty, one can imagine how seeing a large golden object caused Joseph to consider the financial value of the plates, and how they could be the answer to his family's decades-long financial struggles.
I made an attempt to take them out, but was forbidden by the messenger.
Joseph later recalled that when he attempted to take the plates, he felt a shock go through his body. The angel told Joseph he would not be able to take the record until he was ready and free from any temptations to use the plates for his own financial benefit. Upon returning home empty-handed, Joseph likely felt disappointed, and so he consulted with his father, and then eventually, the whole family learned about Joseph's experiences. If there was any suspicion from the family members, it was not mentioned. People having visionary experiences were not something totally uncommon in rural 19th century religious circles. However, Joseph was not just reporting on an isolated event. Instead, he went back to the hill each year, and each time received more.
As I had been commanded, I went at the end of each year, and at each time I found the same messenger there, and received instruction and intelligence from him at each of our interviews, respecting what the Lord was going to do, and how and in what manner his kingdom was to be conducted in the last days.
Joseph may not have told a lot of people about his experiences, but he wasn't shy with his family. In recalling these times, Mother Lucy was perplexed that Joseph, of all of her children, was suddenly so different.
I presume our family presented an aspect as singular as any that ever lived upon the face of the earth, all seated in a circle, father, mother, sons, and daughters, and giving the most profound attention to a boy, 18 years of age, who had never read the Bible through in his life. He seemed much less inclined to the perusal of books than any of the rest of our children.
The experiences of young Joseph was a topic of regular conversation among the Smiths, as Joseph's experiences seemed to be the answer to the family's religious yearnings. And as Lucy recalled, Joseph was eager to share with the family what he had learned from his encounters with the angel.
From this time forth, Joseph continued to receive instructions from the Lord. During our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of traveling, and the animals upon which they rode, their cities, their buildings, with every particular, their mode of warfare, and also their religious worship.
However, when the 17-year-old Joseph first saw the record, he was told he was not ready to take it. So the Smith family was in a state of anticipation, and getting the record promised by the angel was on everyone's mind. That is, until about 6 weeks later, when a tragedy struck that shook the family to its core. 25-year-old Alvin, who was likely called Alvy, was the oldest of the Smith children. In many ways, he was the co-father of the Smith family. He was the steady, reliable, and mature older brother, and was a critical part of ensuring the family was provided for. Unfortunately, in the cold weeks of November 1823, he became ill with a stomach issue, and likely due to a mistake by a doctor, ended up with an infection in his digestive system that put him on his deathbed.
I've done everything I know how to do.
Our beloved oldest son, and Joseph's hero on earth.
As he lay on his deathbed, he told his mother to bring up Lucy, his little 2-year-old sister, so he could say goodbye.
Alvin was always very fond of her and was in the habit of taking her up, which naturally formed a very strong attachment on her part for him. I went to her and said, "Lucy, Alvin wants to see you." We took her to him, and when she got within reach of him, she sprang from my arms and caught him round the neck and cried out, "Oh, my Amby," and kissed him again and again. "Lucy," said he, "you must be the best girl in the world and take care of Mother. You can't have your Amby anymore. Amby is going away. He must leave little Lucy." He then kissed her. We took hold of her to take her away, but she clinched him with such a strong grasp that it was with difficulty we succeeded in disengaging her hands. As I turned with the child to leave him, he said, "Father, Mother, brothers and sisters, farewell. I can now breathe out my life as calmly as a clock." Saying this, he closed his eyes in death. As I bent over his corpse with little Lucy in my arms, she again threw her arms around him and kissed him repeatedly, and until the body was taken from the house, she continued to cry.
Alvin's passing was extremely hard on everyone in the Smith family, but Alvin was also popular with the local community. A well-attended funeral was held at the local Presbyterian church, but heartache turned to anger for Joseph Smith Sr. when the Calvinist minister at the services implied that perhaps Alvin was in hell. With the passing of Alvin, the family fell into a state of depressed mourning that winter and spring. The family all but stopped talking about Joseph's experience with the angel and the record because Alvin had been so excited about the entire affair, and even talking about it brought back the pain of Alvin's loss. So as the family moved into 1824 in a state of mourning, another Christian revival came to the area around Palmyra. And with the death of her son fresh in her mind, Lucy heard Presbyterians and Methodists talk about getting right with God before death. Lucy herself had come close to dying when she was younger, and it seems she associated with the Presbyterians ever since moving to Palmyra. And though we don't know the exact date, with the death of Alvin fresh on her mind, this may have been the time when she decided to take action and join the local Presbyterian church, along with Hiram, Samuel, and Sophronia. However, the 18-year-old Joseph did not follow his mother, and had always felt more partial to the Methodists, and sometimes associated with them. Meanwhile, Joseph Sr. felt a deep disdain for the hellfire preaching of the Presbyterian Calvinists, and was likely annoyed that his wife had joined their church. So with the loss of Alvin and the religious division, Joseph's experiences and the record must have taken a back seat to more pressing issues as the family's economic situation began to fall apart in the next couple of years due to the new house that they had started building prior to Alvin's death. When the home was finished sometime in 1825, Lucy felt like their many years of hard work were finally paying off. She recalled sitting one day in the newly built house.
The day was exceedingly fine, and of itself calculated to produce fine feelings and grateful emotions which we all have seasons of enjoying when the mind is at rest. Thus I stood musing upon the prospect of a quiet and comfortable old age.
However, the contractor on the project likely realized the Smith family was in a bad financial situation and worried about their ability to pay him. So he offered to buy the home from the Smiths, but they declined. The Smith boys likely knew how excited Lucy was to finally have a real house she could feel proud of. So suddenly, Joseph Smith Sr. and his sons, Hiram and Joseph, found themselves having to figure out how to pay the family bills, which had grown substantially, while at the same time having no Alvin to help pay them. And so the Smith boys and their father began looking for whatever extra work they could to ensure they had enough money for the payments on the farm and the new home. So by the time fall of 1825 rolled around, when Joseph was 19, they were looking for any extra work they could get. And they were contacted by a man named Josiah Stowell, who wanted help in finding and digging up a rumored abandoned Spanish silver mine on his property, a few days' journey south near the town of Harmony, Pennsylvania. Josiah had tried previously to locate a rumored abandoned silver mine on his property. When he failed, he decided to look for someone who might be able to help. Much like how even today people use a water witcher with divining rods to find water underground, in the 1820s, seer stones were seen as a folk practice that could be used to find lost objects. And Josiah had heard that Joseph Smith had been known in his youth to help people find lost objects with one of these kinds of stones. So he reached out to the Smiths to see if they could help. He would pay them and offer them a portion of the proceeds if something was found. So with the farming season over and the financial worries hanging over their heads, Joseph, his father, and Hiram traveled to southern New York to help Mr. Stowell. However, apparently shortly after they started, Joseph was reluctant about his ability to find lost objects. Lucy wrote of this time.
Joseph endeavored to divert him from his vain pursuit, but Mr. Stowell was inflexible in his purpose and offered high wages to those who would dig for him in search of said mine, and still insisted upon having Joseph to work for him. After laboring for the old gentleman about a month without success, Joseph prevailed upon him to cease his operations.
However, despite the venture being a financial failure, it was during this time that Joseph boarded at the property of Isaac Hale, who had a pretty young daughter named Emma. And Emma was just a few months older than the 19-year-old Joseph. Also, it's interesting to note that even though no silver mine was found, Mr. Stowell was impressed with Joseph's honesty and work ethic, and kept using him as a worker on various projects. Eventually, Mr. Stowell referred Joseph out to others, like the Knight family, who also lived in the area around Harmony, Pennsylvania. And during this time, Joseph's ability to make money for his family was more needed than ever. In the first cold months of 1826, the Smiths' debts were called in, and they lost their farm to their creditors. But luckily, in a flurry of last-minute arrangements, a wealthy friend of the Smiths purchased the farm from the creditors and allowed them to stay on as renters. But this was a deep humiliation for Joseph Sr. and Lucy. They had worked so hard to become landowners and to secure their situation as they moved into their old age. Lucy and her husband were now in their late 50s, more worried than ever that they were going to become a burden to their children.
The anxiety of mind that I suffered can more easily be imagined than described. I now looked upon the proceeds of our industry, which smiled around us on every hand, with a kind of yearning attachment that I never before had experienced. And our early losses I did not feel so keenly, for I then realized that we were young, and by making some exertions we might improve our circumstances besides. I had not felt the inconveniences of poverty as I had since.
And the disappointments did not stop. In the spring of 1826, Joseph was suddenly called into court. Apparently, after observing the failure of the Spanish silver mine project, a skeptical nephew of Mr. Stowell pressed misdemeanor charges against Joseph as a disorderly person for claiming that he could use a seer stone to find lost objects. This broad, disorderly person statute allowed prosecution of people who were homeless or unemployed or engaged in behavior the community deemed a nuisance, such as what they called glass-looking. Apparently, this nephew felt that because no silver mine was found, Joseph had cheated Josiah and was bothered that his uncle was continuing to employ Joseph. Now, while there is no official records of the trial, a preliminary evaluation meeting was had in front of a judge in March of 1826. There is some debate over what happened exactly, as later testimonies gave conflicting accounts, but the evidence seems to indicate that because Mr. Stowell came to Joseph's defense and adamantly insisted Joseph was not defrauding him, the charges were dropped. However, as Lucy remembered,
It was from this circumstance that the very prevalent story arose of Joseph's having been a money digger.
Despite these challenges, the year of 1826 should be known as the year of Joseph and Emma's courtship. Joseph and Emma were now 20, and Joseph was spending a lot of time in her area working for Josiah Stowell and the Knight family. Probably both to try and help the family stay financially afloat, but also probably so he could be able to visit Emma. It was also during this period that Joseph developed a sufficiently strong relationship with his employers that he told the Knight family and Josiah Stowell about his experiences with the angel. And these may have been the first people outside of his family he told about the plates. Emma was also likely told about Joseph's unique experiences during this period. And so by the fall of 1826, with things getting serious between Joseph and Emma, her father Isaac was worried. Isaac was middle class. Joseph was from a town 3 days away who Isaac first met as a laborer involved in treasure digging. An outsider and a common laborer involved in things like this was not exactly what Isaac had in mind for his pretty and well-educated daughter. Joseph and Emma knew that Isaac would not approve of them getting married, despite their deep affection for one another. So in January of 1827, the 21-year-old couple eloped and moved directly back to Joseph's family near Palmyra. So after waiting for tempers to cool, Emma wrote to her father asking if she and Joseph could travel down and get her belongings. Isaac said yes, and so Joseph and Emma made the trip back, fully expecting an uncomfortable confrontation, which is exactly what happened. When Emma's father met the couple, he berated Joseph for having taken his daughter without his blessing. But instead of fighting back, Joseph was apologetic and sought to reconcile with his new father-in-law by telling him that his treasure-digging days were behind him and that he had every intention of providing a good life for his daughter. He offered to let them live on his property and help them as they got their life started. Joseph and Emma eventually took Isaac up on this offer, but for the time being they returned to Palmyra, satisfied with the reconciliation. Joseph was now 21. Almost 4 years had passed since his first encounter with the angel at age 17. As the summer of 1827 neared its end, Joseph was getting ready to make another visit to the hill where the plates were hidden. He had gone to the hill each year in September since his initial visit, and each time he was told that he wasn't ready. However, sometime in 1827, he had been severely rebuked by the angel for his lack of preparation, and Joseph was, in effect, told that it was either now or never. So Joseph was likely taking the whole thing more seriously than ever, and now he expected that when he went to the hill this year, it would be different, and he would actually be allowed to take the plates.